Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next presentation, which is going to be on Amazon. And really, it's just a case of building on what Jeff said about brand, consumer, and product, and looking at it from a slightly different lens. So we're up, great. So just to summarize from what we saw this morning around the supermarket space, that industry growth at the moment is pretty much half what it used to be going back from 2009. So this is growth going along here. That's been driven by massive price deflation, as we talked about. It's been driven by Aldi going mainstream and consumers get it, you know, and probably not so much so on the West Coast so far, but on the East Coast, people understand Aldi, it resonates with them, they understand the business model. You've got Coles that has done the turnaround on the Wesfarmers. You've now got Woolworths, which has just started to turn as well. And then you've got the emergence of Corfland and now Amazon as well. So the question businesses are asking themselves is, how do you capture value? As a business, how do you capture value in order to grow? And when you look at the press, you know, there's all these scary kind of comments coming through about, you know, Amazon creates to create the biggest retail disruption in Australia in a generation. It's probably in the world in a generation. Could be between 3 to 4 billion sales in 3 years in Australia and 8 to 10 billion in 5 years. They spent 16 billion US last year on R&D. They're not fussed about profits and shareholder returns, particularly in terms of that dividend. So it's a very, very different business model. So just want to go through who is Amazon, why is grocery food shopping so important to them? And that's where it comes down to the relevance for us here today, is that if we're saying it's about food security and getting consumers to come along, well, the way you access those consumers is through the retailers. And Amazon is a great example of understanding the consumer really well and meeting those needs with a blend of technology, admittedly, but really understanding what the consumer wants and giving it to them in the way they want it. And that's the key thing if we're going to get this message across to anybody. And then finally, just a bit of future forecast of what will that impact potentially look like. So if we look at Amazon currently today, and you know, they are mooted to be opening in about a couple of weeks. By the end of November, they should be supplying in Australia. They've already got 10% of the online spend, so that's $2 billion a year, and that's through Amazon.co.uk and Amazon.com. So people are actually pretty familiar with buying online, and essentially they are everywhere. You could break Amazon down to two real major categories: the business to consumer, the B2C, which really hinges around this Amazon Prime, and that's about bundling. It's membership, so it's saying, well, you can get unlimited video streaming, music, ebooks, you can store your photos, you get free shipping within 2 days, etc., etc. So the value proposition is around that bundling concept. That's the business model. On the other side, you've got the business to business, which is around sort of web services, which is the real profit generator in Amazon, is where, you know, hosting internet services and so on, and then the marketplace. And this is probably more relevant to businesses because they can use marketplace they can pick and choose what they use in marketplace. So marketplace on one level will be doing picking, packing, shipping, exchanging, or they could just use it as a site to actually sell their products. That does mean that you're giving retail price control to a different entity, and you could disintermediate your existing retailer customers. And that's the challenges like brands like Nike are going through at the moment, where they said we're going to sell on Amazon. Well, who controls the retail price? So it's quite dangerous for brands. But this is the main bit, Amazon Prime. And when you look at the customer value proposition, it is around Amazon's focus is to save consumers time over and above money. People often think Amazon is about being the least cost. It's not always. They might be the least cost on the big TV, and they'll have complex algorithms that are running to see that at any point in time they are the cheapest for that big item. But when it comes to buying the leads, the power cords, any additional items to go with it, often they're more expensive. So they do some margin blending. It's quite cleverly done. But it's reliable quality with minimal hassle. And this is an example here of Amazon's Alexa-controlled Echo speaker, which is a virtual assistant. I don't know how familiar people are with this, but in the US, it's absolutely massive. It's like Siri on your phone when you go, if I say, hey Siri, everyone's phone's going to go, hey Siri, which would be quite interesting to test that. But it's exactly the same as Siri on your phone, where it will just basically, you can talk to it and it will do everything for you. What's amazing is 60% of US households now have Amazon Prime membership with a range of 320 million products. Now, if you bear in mind that Coles and Woolworths is somewhere between 17 and 25,000 products, the biggest retailers in the world will probably be around the 60 to 70,000 products. 320 million. Fast delivery. And this has been out for a number of years now. It's been out for about 3 or 4 years. And we're seeing the next generation of virtual assistants coming along. And I've got a little video to play, which will hopefully set that scene, which is called the Dash Wand.
Ask all recipes for a shrimp pasta recipe.
My recommendation is champagne shrimp and pasta recipe. Main ingredients are shrimp, mushrooms, plum tomatoes, cream, and Parmesan cheese.
Mushrooms. Tomatoes. How many ounces are in a cup?
1 cup equals 8 fluid ounces.
Buy white wine for private hour.
Your favorite white wine will be here between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m.
Dim lights to 70%. The Holy Friend.
So you might have seen at the end there that, it's $20, but you get that refund on your first purchase. So essentially it's free. But you can see how they're blending technology to erode friction points and pain points for the consumer to make life easier for the consumer, makes it basically more convenient, saving time. So it's amazingly clever. And then this is the latest edition that's coming out, is augmented reality, whereby you can visualize online products in your own living space just by superimposing, which is pretty basic at the moment, but is improving at a rapid rate of knots. So Amazon just great is that blend of technology to solve consumer pain points. And looking at the model, if you look at the Amazon ecosystem, it's really interesting how this plays out and some of the implications it has on the consumer as well as the suppliers to Amazon. So if you imagine that the marketplace model here, it's about open access to all consumers and all businesses. Amazon captures the economies of scope with that broad range, that 320 million products with the economies of scale, so lower average costs. Those scale benefits are invested into lower prices and ever-increasing range, which then increases value for consumers, generates higher customer satisfaction, increases loyalty, brand strength, leads to market share gains. Ultimately, Amazon owns the customer. That's what it ends up with. Now, the enabler of this is cash and first mover advantage. The output, data and analytics. Amazon has phenomenal ability to understand, interrogate data and extract meaningful insights. It's something the retailers, the major grocery retailers are now pretty good at as well, but Amazon is way ahead. Amazon can forecast what people want before they think they actually want it. That's the kind of space they're in, based on what else is that person doing, where are they, what other products they're doing, what stages of their life are they in, are they sort of buying sort of products that suggest they might be having a baby, and look, 3 months later they've had a baby. They're predicting the future. It's incredible what they can do with technology and analysis. So what Amazon's doing here is they can see what products are selling. So they will create private label brands for the high-selling lines. So you're selling your product on Amazon, it's selling really well. You're going happy days. They see that. They build their private label brands. These are some of the brands they've created. Battery brand, Amazon Basics, grocery, food, household and clothing. Now, electronics. Of the online purchases in the US last year, of $110 million of spend on online batteries, Amazon had 92% of that market. So you can see how clever that strategy is in terms of capturing that share. Now, this obviously is a positive feedback loop because it actually ends up that Amazon owns the supplier. So they own the consumer, they own the supplier. Very, very clever business model. And as a supplier, they give you access to the world. Australia's not gone orange yet, but it will do probably within this month. So you can sell on the Amazon platform and you can sell into any of these markets. Amazon will do the fulfillment. Pick, pack, ship, do the refunds. They'll do the whole lot for you. And to really understand Amazon, you've got to understand this guy, Jeff Bezos. As you saw his, saying, your margin is my opportunity. This is a letter that he sent out. It was a 1997 letter to shareholders. He sent it out every year with his annual report to remind everyone they're in day one. And when he talks about day one, he's really coming from the perspective of day one vitality. And the idea is a business always has to stay in day one. As soon as it goes to day two, this is his words, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day one. And when you go to Dandadong in Melbourne and you look at the sign outside the new Amazon fulfillment centre, this is it. It's still day one. Are you ready to make a difference? So, that's the sort of guy he is. But when he talks about true customer obsession, this is an extract from, again, his annual report. And I think it just summarizes customer obsession so well. So I'll just leave you a second to read that. So to the question we had from Rod and Jeff's response about food security and customers getting it, yeah, we're preaching to the converted here, but really we've actually got to say, how do we package this for the consumer? And that is so critical, and it's something that Amazon does so well. So something else Jeff Bezos does is he says this: think big and then think bigger. Because he wants to ensure his products get to the consumer on time as fast as possible, he's got his own fleet of trucks. He's gone and spent $1.5 billion on 40 planes in an airport hub in North Kentucky. He's now heavily invested into drone technology, and there's trials in the UK where they're actually making deliveries by drones within 30 minutes. Amazon have the business is called Amazon Prime Air. This is a patent that's actually gone in, whereby this is central city centre drone delivery towers. The trucks come in at the bottom, deliver products, and they go up elevators internally, drones fly in. So it's based on a beehive, essentially, and then drones will fly out and deliver products and then come back and restock. And they can be recharged en route, or they can be recharged back here. So incredible technology, and you just imagine the paperwork to get that through. I mean, it would just be insurmountable with drones falling on people's heads. But think big, then think bigger. He's absolutely, doing what he says he's going to do. And whilst it's not an Amazon business, he's also owns Blue Origin, planning to launch cargo spacecraft to shuttle goods and eventually humans to the moon by 2020. So he is convinced there will be buildings built on the moon, and he will be doing deliveries. So he's a bold thinker. If we look back at the journey that Amazon's come on since Jeff Bezos created it, it's interesting where it's come from. So, originally started obviously in the US and predominantly around books. Didn't make profit till 2001. It's now valued at $540 billion. It's the fifth biggest company after Apple and Google, Microsoft, etc. As I've mentioned, it opened in Melbourne, and we'll talk about the Amazon Go store, but it's been a phenomenal success story from what he's taken it from and to. Perhaps the area that is questionable is, in terms of, whilst he says we seek to be the Earth's most customer-centric company, actually, he's also saying, and take a cut of all economic activity. And that's possibly where it's a little bit controversial, because ultimately, revenue's up at about 140 billion. EBIT, profit, is around 4 billion, incredibly low. So that raises the question, what's the long-term cost of lower consumer prices in terms of wages? Where does that money go? Is it taken offshore, et cetera, and about working conditions, et cetera. And there is a belief that Amazon could be about the strategy around being last man standing and put everyone else out of business. I'm the only one here, now I can put prices up. And Australia is famous for that kind of behavior in terms of altering market structure to create favorable, profit conditions. So yeah, some question marks there. So why is grocery retailing important to Amazon? it's really around this. Grocery is the largest retail category. The frequency of purchase, the stock turn, the fact you've got consumers coming in regularly, particularly when you go into the fresh food area, is massively important. And essentially, grocery shopping is dull. Aldi's probably the only retailer in recent years that has made shopping a little bit more interesting by coming into those central aisle products. But essentially, it's pretty dull. And Amazon realizes that whilst it's got large market share with Amazon Prime, that subscription model where they bundle everything in, that can quite easily be picked off by other online retailers. So they need to retain the loyalty of those consumers. And when you look at the enablers for this, it's essentially money, time, and data. And that is all things that Amazon has. Probably all heard that Amazon made the acquisition of Whole Foods Market just recently. It's just been approved by the Competition Commission, $13.7 billion. Whole Foods Markets is a premium, organic, top-end retailer, not small, turns over about $15 billion US, about 460 stores. It's a big business. And it's interesting that it's the biggest single acquisition that Amazon has ever made, and it's interesting that it's in an area of grocery food. So the question is, why buy? And essentially it's because Amazon's failing in grocery. And they launched Amazon Fresh 10 years ago. It's had limited success. They've only got 0.8% of the grocery market in the US, and people believe they're a lot bigger than that, and they're not. And only 10% of consumers are buying grocery compared to what they buy on other products. So, online is not going to be enough for grocery. So bricks and mortar stores are going to be absolutely critical to be successful within grocery food. So when you look at this and you say, well, Amazon's building this business, Amazon Grocery Services, really the key to profitability is this, having a first and best customer. And Amazon always does this. Secure a first and best customer to basically underwrite the massive investment that is necessary. So if you imagine you've got all these products that need to come in to make a grocery service work, across food service, across some fresh food and grocery food and so on. Ultimately, that enables you to supply, obviously, Whole Foods, which is your best customer, and then also do home delivery and also supply to restaurants and food service. So actually, Whole Foods acquisition is not about buying a retailer, it's about buying a customer base to provide the necessary scale, because they've got that scale locked down. They've covered their fixed costs. And ultimately, it also does this. It means they get the data and analytics so they can learn about retailing. So when they bought Whole Foods, I reckon they'll be salivating over that quantity of that rich data they'll be able to access about Whole Foods customers. And it's also something else, is that you can say, well, what are the insights? This behavior of Amazon purchasing Whole Foods, what does it mean? Essentially, it says that grocery shopping will always be that blended mix of online and offline. Physical stores are necessary. The last mile delivery, so by last mile delivery, it means getting product picked in distribution centers or in stores is actually not too difficult. It's actually getting that last mile to the home, to the actual consumer, is very difficult and very costly. Plus, in America, they've got these food deserts where you have low-income families that can't afford to buy fresh foods because they can't access fresh foods. So, wrong button. So that's part of it as well. Then obviously big data, as we've talked about. But there's another thing as well. Amazon, Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world. Actually, it turns over just over 500 billion. Run by Greg Ferran, who was the 2IC in Woolworths that didn't get the top gig, and he's gone out to take the biggest retailer in the world instead. Anyway, Amazon wants to become Walmart before Walmart becomes Amazon. That's essentially what we're saying. So that is who they're competing about. They're both into these, pickup. They're trialing these, drive-in pickup locations. Walmart is actually the leader in this store collection and drive-up pickup kiosks. They've got 17% share. They've got a store within 10 miles of 90% of Americans. They've got 140 million consumers. So you can see why Amazon is going, my God, if we don't get hold of this pretty soon, we're going to be in trouble. And what will be interesting is whether Amazon would make a similar acquisitional route in Australia. Would they try and acquire a Coles and a Woolworths? I bet they've been in conversations with them. In the UK, they've actually got a JV partnership with Morrison's, one of the big four. It'd be surprising if they didn't have some kind of conversations going on in Australia. Now, in terms of this, we talked about the Echo speaker. Walmart's got the same. They've done a deal with Google Home, powered by the Google Assistant. That's got about 23% market share. We know the voice-activated market is increasing more and more. I was back in the UK this summer, as in UK summer in June. I went and saw a friend, and I said to him, tell me about the Echo speaker. How often do you use it? He goes, I buy a product every day. So he looked at the weather while we're there. He said, I'll show you. He said, I said, yeah, Saturday, it's going to be, weather's good. I'm going to play golf. Actually, I need some golf socks. Talks, Echo, Alexa, wake up. I need a pair of socks, size 9. Next day, it's delivered. Every day he buys a product. It's quite incredible. It's probably not right as well on a moral level. But anyway, and Walmart has done a partnership. They bought Jet for $3 billion, which is another online business. So you can see these guys are going head to head. It's a pretty even-pitched fight. You'd argue in retailing, Walmart is probably ahead of the game. And this is what's going to come next, which is just a bit of a video to say, well, how will Amazon break down that barrier between online, offline, bricks and mortars shopping, called Amazon Go.
4 years ago, we started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go? What if we could weave the most advanced machine learning, computer vision, and AI into the very fabric of a store, so you never have to wait in line? No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go. Use the Amazon Go app to enter. Then put away your phone and start shopping. It's really that simple. Take whatever you like. Anything you pick up is automatically added to your virtual cart. If you change your mind about that cupcake, just put it back. Our technology will update your virtual cart automatically. So, how does it work? We use computer vision, deep learning algorithms, and sensor fusion, much like you find in self-driving cars. We call it Just Walk Out technology. Once you've got everything you want, you can just go. When you leave, our Just Walk Out technology adds up your virtual cart and charges your Amazon account. Your receipt is sent straight to the app, and you can keep going. Amazon Go. No lines, no checkout. No, seriously.
So again, just an example of how Amazon's using technology to change something that's been so established for such a long period of time and remove friction, make consumers' shopping experience more convenient. That's in beta at the moment, so it's only open to Amazon employees in Seattle, but it's thought that that will be rolled out and blended into the Whole Foods stores that have been acquired. Probably not to the full extent, but certainly some of that will be. But essentially, the message you can say from that is, it is positioned around that food to go, that high footfall metropolitan type stores. It's it's convenience, it's staffless, and essentially it's encouraging trial by building brand presence through bricks and mortar stores. So consumers will say, actually, Amazon Go, it's a retail store, it's in Whole Foods, yeah, get it, feel okay with that. So what will be the impact of Amazon? And perhaps the question before that comes to, why Australia? So you've got two big gorillas. You've got Amazon, you've got Alibaba in China. It's also extending around the world. And essentially, this is around first move advantage. Amazon, the only country Amazon ever withdrew from was China because they didn't get in there quick enough, and Alibaba have control over there. So whilst Australia is a small market, it's rich, it's stable, it's still growing, so it's attractive even though it's small. So it's about getting in, securing it to almost keep Alibaba out. Now, when you see what Alibaba is doing as well, they've taken a slightly different strategy, which I'll show you. But the slide from before, Australia is still pretty low in terms of that online spend compared to other countries like the UK and the US. But what we know about Alibaba is what the activity they've done so far is not targeting Australian consumers, but really is targeting consumers in their home countries, in their natural territories. They've got 407 million consumers using Alibaba online marketplace at the moment, so they've got a huge customer base already established. And what they've already done with Australian products is this. Calypso Mango campaign that happened last year, and also New Zealand Queen Apple launch. So it's really taking high-quality Australian, New Zealand brands out to the Chinese middle class, which is massive. Great opportunity for Australia. Not necessarily going to help our issue around food security in WA, but it's a good opportunity for producers. So when we say which categories and when in Australia, soft launch, what we said this year, and then probably a full launch in 2018 with more products. And the debate is whether Amazon in Australia will go down a 1PL or a 3PL route, which basically means will they go 1PL where they buy the product and they have retail price control, or will they go down the 3PL, which will be more about letting businesses sell on their platform and then but have control of the retail pricing. So still to be seen, and even last week there was no confirmed decision made. What's interesting about Australia is it's the most metropolitan market in the world. 50% of Australia's population live in just 3 cities, Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney. So actually, it's a very, very efficient market for Amazon if they're just going to target those metropolitan areas. When you look at Amazon Fresh in the UK that launched in June last year, they actually only targeted London in the first instance, and from London they then rolled out to some of the home counties about a year later. So you can see Australia will be very attractive for those reasons. Now, when you look at the rollout by country, so this is product item, this is physical media as books. These are the items that rolled out. These are the countries. These are the years they rolled out. So in the US, started in '95, and it was only really by 2008 they're into all those products. Now, when you look at countries like Mexico, where they've opened relatively recently, 2015, you can see how it didn't take long to go from not a lot to quite a lot. So you could surmise from that the category expansion in Australia will be pretty quick. It'll probably be 2 to 3 years before they have the full range and before Amazon Fresh with that grocery model is up and running. When you consider that the impact to some of the, by sector, is quite significant. So this is the 3 to 5 year profit margin impact in terms of basis points. So electronics, Jerry Harvey is going to get smashed. So he's talking up saying he's got 80 million in a fund to combat Amazon. You might as well give it a charity because it ain't going to touch the sides. So, and even when you flow down to grocery, 37 basis points, yeah, you're talking significant margin impact at a time when competition has never been greater between Aldi, Coles, Woolworths, etc. So you can see this is just really going to get a very competitive space in the next 2 to 3 years. When you look at the forecast share of non-food retail, this is Morgan Stanley data, by 2026 about nearly 5%, and you can see how that compares to some of the other countries here. Why, the question is why won't food be first? And really food's difficult, and particularly fresh food. So, when picking and delivering food is more costly than non-food. So it's about $30 to $40 per transaction, and the margins are lower to start with anyway. So fresh foods will be really difficult for Amazon. Secondly, in terms of scale, given Australia's quarantine restrictions, particularly in fresh produce, 97% of all fresh produce that is consumed in Australia is grown in Australia, and that's mainly due to pest and disease issues and aqueous issues. So it's going to take time for them to turn that local sourcing on. And then finally on cool chain, cool chain, you need to have cool chain in Australia. It's more expensive, it's more complex, albeit Amazon is a logistics expert and will be happy to invest. So in terms of that food retail impact, it's slightly lower, 1.1% by 2026, but you're still talking, of a $90 billion grocery market, you're still talking $1 billion of sales. It's not, it's not insignificant. Innovation in retailing. So this is an interesting. So in terms of businesses that will, retail businesses, bricks and mortar retail businesses, how will they take on and combat Amazon? And essentially, their stores will need to provide experiences that you can't get from online retailers. So it's the showroom, it's the collection points, it's a space for holding events. It's giving a personalized retail experience that matches individual buying habits, that customization. And when you look in retail and you say, well, what are the sort of things that have worked and what are the sort of things that have failed? It's quite interesting. So you probably all remember when QR codes came along. Where do you see them now? Airline tickets, that's about it. Hasn't really worked. When you look at proximity push advertising, so when you walk past a store and you get an alert saying, oh, you're 500 meters from a Coles store, can you go and, here's a Nestle chocolate bar you can get 50 cents off? Consumers actually found it a bit invading to have brands targeting them with those kinds of activities. It didn't work. It didn't resonate. In terms of group buying power, there were loads of businesses say, "Oh, let's get together and let's buy together. We'll capture the synergy benefits and average costs go down." It didn't work. The only group buying businesses really still in existence are probably ones like Groupon, where they actually produce the content themselves. So those are all sort of things that have failed. But when you look at the ones that are working, Amazon Go in terms of checkout free shopping, absolutely. Which consumer wouldn't like just being able to walk out the store? It's a constant barrier for Aldi. People hate queuing up in Aldi. Drone delivery, so you've got a number of different businesses. UPS is now doing a lot with drone delivery in terms of 30-minute deliveries, recharging drones on top of their trucks as they're driving around. It's working. They're using it for aid relief in developing countries. And then programmatic advertising, which is whereby you can sell off advertising space in real time. And you can put in any kind of criteria in terms of locality, impact, time of day, and you have certain adverts that pop up on the freeway as you're driving down the freeway on a certain billboard at certain times of day, and it can be bought very, very quickly and cheaply. So you can see this sort of change in retailing. So finally, how do retailers compete with Amazon? How do Coles and Woolworths compete? Ultimately leveraging existing assets. So, they use what they've already got in terms of loyalty programs, that real estate, which is hugely expensive, and the customer data, and try and get more insights out of the customer data than Amazon can. Use that to protect and to know and protect your consumers, to build that loyalty, drive the product differentiation. So private label, we saw some information about private label. That will be absolutely key to the strategies in Coles and Woolworths. Aldi is already 98% private label, so they're already there. Coles and Woolworths have to pick that up. Experiential categories, so categories that are require labour involvement or are highly involved or emotive with the consumer. Those experiential categories will be important to consumers. Fish counters, cooked chickens in store, those sorts of things. Investment in online sites, it's a no-brainer. Your online site has to be as good as the competition. You have to improve the efficiencies in order to then invest in retail price and drive price perception. And it is perception as much as reality. And then finally, having that blend of physical and online, which is also a blend then of digital and traditional. And that's where Amazon's been so good in terms of taking what has been very established, shopping behaviors and saying, how can we improve it? How can we take the pain out for the consumer? So that was as much, and a final bit there is to say, ultimately it means doing more for less. That will be the end state. So that was as much as I was going to say about Amazon. I'm just going to leave you one sort of slightly light-hearted alternative view of Amazon by way of finish. Oh. If it will work. No.
4 years ago, we started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go?
Hey!
No lines, no checkout, no paper trail. Welcome to Anything Goes. You don't even need to use the Anything Goes app to enter. Just walk into any store, avoid security cameras, and you start taking things. It's really that simple.
My whole life I've been stealing movies and music online, so why not food?
With Anything Goes, we provide complete automation every step of the way. As you leave the store, your items will be towed for you by a police officer. While our competitors at Amazon use deep learning algorithms, sensor fusion, and fabricated technobabble to track your every move, our app uses our very own patented technology we call stealth. We recommend wearing a large jacket for seamless transportation and a low-angle hat for increased security.
I'm all for free stuff, just when it's not my stuff.
Unlike Amazon Go, our cutting-edge technology isn't confined to a single store in Seattle. You can use Anything Goes literally anywhere.
Hey, how's it going? Can I help you? No, sir, that's actually mine. Sir, that's
That's my lamb. Anything goes. No lines, no checkout, no series. Goes Jesse.
I've been using anything goes for years. I just didn't know.
Okay, that was it. Thank you for your time. Got a bit of time for some questions? Yeah. We've got a mic coming round. Can't get out of this one.
You mentioned that Australia's phytosanitary barriers could be an inconvenience to Amazon during their establishment phase. I guess maybe they're the sort of company with the drive for change and the deep pockets to perhaps think that that might serve their purpose to legally or scientifically challenge the basis of those barriers in order to free up entry of goods from wherever they wanted to bring them into the Australian marketplace. Is there evidence of that sort of behaviour elsewhere where they have opened up shop?
Look, probably the best analogy would be to go to Aldi, that they managed to get planning regulations changed to enable them to open up in areas that they weren't allowed to previously open up in. So because they're big and they've got capital, they will get the ear of government. Now, Amazon, you would argue, is the same in the sense that they are a big business. And, you look at Amazon's putting up a second office in the US. They were, I think, mooted to bring in $30 billion of revenue into that city. And they had many, many cities just bending over backwards saying, don't pay, government saying, don't pay tax and don't do this and we'll give you everything. So you would imagine that money talks. So, yeah, I think they'll put pressure on anywhere they can to change the status quo. Now, it comes down to the science and the phytosanitary, restrictions of what they can and can't do. Certainly if bananas, if another cyclone came along and bananas were wiped out, I think you'd probably have Coles and Woolworths saying, look, this isn't acceptable for consumers. Consumers are missing out. Amazon will be no different to that. They'll just be more vocal and they'll push hard. But there's another argument as well that says that with greater demand for a limited pool of fresh food, shall we say, you could argue there is increased negotiation leverage that will fall into the hands of the producers. Now, it's whether those producers can actually stick together and work collectively, or if they will fall into the trap of what retailers or experts are doing, which is dividing and conquering. Play you off against you until you give me what I want. So actually working collectively together, and this is where I think New Zealand does it really well. That, take the Apple industry in New Zealand, they know when to work together and they know when to compete. But it'll be interesting, unknown at the moment. Yeah.
Given this really competitive environment in the big supermarkets, can you see any markets that are actually going to be hospitable to growers? And what would that look like? Is it cooperatives of growers? Is it direct sales, farmers markets, these kind of alternative online sales?
Yeah. So look, farmers markets and those outlets they're fine, yeah, but they're tiny. And they're never going to be able to shift the volumes, or it's like organic. Organics as a concept is great, but ultimately you're never going to feed the whole world, the whole country with organics. Someone's nodding their head, you can challenge me on that. So, unless things are going to really change significantly, it's difficult to do that. Now, I think, it's a case of saying, well, will growers be better off working together, or will they be better? Will they not? And I think working together is absolutely critical. And it should give you some scale benefits as well. You should be able to invest in all the things you need to invest in. But unfortunately, Australia, I've spent all my time in fresh produce, and I remember seeing, apple growers, pear growers in the southern Tyrol in Italy, who are, they've got little, between 1 and 10 acre farms. They're tiny. Yet they have 2 and 3, Brett, you've probably seen them, 200 or 300 growers going into a facility. They all know what they're doing. They're professional business people. They're not, they're not the typical kind of, how do I say it, growers that perhaps aren't doing the things that they need to be doing. They are professional, on it business people. And it works. And I was buying from them when I was at Sainsbury's, and they were great to deal with. They did what they said they were going to do. But unfortunately in Australia, and I don't know whether it's geographical isolation or the tyranny of distance, that growers in this country do not seem to trust each other, and they will not work together. And I don't know why. And unfortunately, that is to the advantage of the retailers. And the question might be is, the burning platform for change. Often change doesn't happen until businesses are in so much pain that it's the only alternative they've got. And that applies to what we're talking about today. And change will only happen when the consumers, as in everybody out there, realizes that things need to change.
Tristan, Graham McAlpine. In terms of how they manage their logistics from their supply perspectives, do they then, you're talking about them virtually owning the supply chain then and working directly out of them. That's going to make a significant change for operators in that sector in our country. Has that been the experience elsewhere?
They'll work in any way that the producer will want to work with. They'll be very flexible. They tend to like to use their own distribution because they can do it better, cheaper, more efficiently, more reliably than anybody else can.
But they don't have DCs, do they? Distribution centres?
Yeah, they do.
They do?
They do. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
They will be going down that route. I mean, look, the Australian models is all still to be confirmed. They've only got the one site in Melbourne at the moment, so it'll be determined. But yeah, they've done it elsewhere.
Yeah, g'day, Rowan Prince here. Just got a question between the conflict of low cost being demanded by the consumer or being driven by the provider, the retailer, compared to food security and growers needing to actually stay in business and be profitable. Because when you think about it, there's not too many new farmers coming into the business, and the farmers with the knowledge of how to grow things, they don't tend to come along that frequently, yeah. So there seems to be a really big divide between having the knowledge, remaining profitable, having land and water, and then retailers and consumers driving this lower cost attitude. So I just wanted to see if you could comment on the conflict and who's driving that conflict.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, I think consumers are driving it as much as retailers are driving it. Because retailers will only do it if consumers responded to it. So if consumers didn't buy more product by retailers selling it cheaper, they wouldn't sell it cheaper. So ultimately, they're at times giving margin away as well. So I think ultimately consumers do not value food to the extent, and I think Julian was there earlier showing some numbers of 30% down to 8 or 9% that we spend on our disposable income on food. But essentially, unless consumers see value in paying more, and you as a producer are giving more, why would consumers pay more for it? And I think it's just basic economics. It's a commodity space, and a lot of it is a global commodity space, which means it's not even, you're a price taker, not a price setter. So, yeah. Does that answer you? Yeah. Sure. So consumers probably won't realise the food security issue until they are being impacted here and now and experiencing it on a day-to-day where they can't get what they want to get. Unfortunately, when you look at past precedents of what's happened, that's been what's happened. I haven't got it. Oh, it must be a problem. I better do something about it. But unfortunately, consumers are, especially when you look at the millennials and so on, they are very much about consuming now, consuming today, not worrying about tomorrow. Don't buy a house, rent, go travelling, eat out in nice restaurants, have nice clothes. The mindset is not necessarily there, which means there is possibly in terms of food security, there's a massive marketing and consumer engagement, consumer understanding piece that probably has to happen before, to get the burning platform established.
Hi, just have a comment and then a question. In regards to how much we're spending on food, I think it's also really important to recognise that the cost of living has exponentially grown compared to wages. So although we might not be spending so much on food, that's because we're spending a lot of it on utilities and other cost of living expenses. And in terms of maybe what you were saying just then, one of the questions I have is that in the context of food security and climate change, and earlier on we were talking about some of the events that could really threaten food security on a big scale. Just another shout out to all of our small growing solutions, because at the end of the day, if there's a collapse in jobs and things, I'm not sure that Amazon's or some of the big retailers will be all that benevolent. So I think coming back, there's got to be that local solution to protect ourselves against the economic impacts and the cost of food in those situations.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what I can add to that apart from saying, yeah, sure. You know, I can only sort of relate it to the UK example where local retailers have gone out of business. I grew up in London I'm 44. I grew up in London in the early 70s, and I remember going down the high street where I used to live, and now there's no fishmonger, there's no butcher, there's no greengrocer. It's literally a little Tesco's Metro. There's charity shops, takeaways, and that's it. It's a very sterile landscape. But when you look at what's happening, I didn't touch upon it earlier today, but really you're seeing this waterbed effect happen in Australia, whereby as the big retailers, let's take the big two, as they put pressure on manufacturers, and manufacturers, this is the British sausages example, are then forced to increase price. They have to give a lower price to Coles and Woolworths. How do they maintain their profitability? Well, they charge a higher price to other retailers. Let's say it's Metcash, IGA, Independents. So those prices go up. Now, those retailers have no choice but to pass on that higher cost to the consumer in terms of higher retail prices in order to recover some of their margin. But if you've got, which is why the big get bigger, and profitability, maintaining profitability of manufacturers becomes harder. So if we're in a negotiation and you're Coles and Woolworths and you beat me up and you get a dollar out of me, and Coles and Woolworths have got 80% of the market, for me to maintain my profitability, I have to go back and get an extra $4 out of the independents. I'm not going to be able to do that. And as a consumer, I'm happy to pay 5-10% more to go to my local IGA, but I'm not going to pay 15 and 20% more. I'd rather jump in the car, drive 5 Ks down the road and go to my local Coles where I'll do one big shop, and I'll get many, many more savings. So it's this waterbed effect. And this came out of the private label milk Senate inquiry, where they actually monetized the impact. And unfortunately, it's a very difficult argument, because when Coles go up to the ACCC and they say, what, you don't want me to give lower prices to consumers? You want me to put prices up? It's difficult. Yeah, Costa.
I don't know who it was that was mentioning food security over there, but as far as like the reality that's going to hit the ground this Christmas, the biggest example will be the gift of whether you're a prawn eater or not. This Christmas, the price of prawns is going to be through the roof.
Yeah.
Why? Because of a biosecurity reality with white spot.
Yeah.
So whether your prawns are all right over here, because of the fact that the prawns on the east coast are going to be decimated, the cost of prawns as a Christmas gift for everyone in the country is going to go ballistic, and that will put food security through biosecurity right on the front foot, which I'll talk about a bit in my next talk. But yeah, it's a reality that that is going to become more and more prevalent.
Absolutely valid point, and that is a time to use the prawn example as a case study to say, look what's happened in prawns. Now, this is the time. We have to act now if we want to stop that happening in all these other categories. And people intuitively, human behaviour intuitively, people will respond more, they understand case studies more easily. Why have we got Rachel here today talking about the Melbourne example? Because it's easy to get your head around it. It de-risks it when you've seen someone else do it. If you've seen another industry go through that experience, well, we'd be dumb to let it happen again. So that is something that should be built upon and used as a sort of communication vehicle to consumers.
One last question?
Yep. Yep, one last question, yep.
I hear a theme of profiteering, I suppose, along the large corporate lines, and with my health hat on, I sort of wonder, how do we get around the same table, and is there a sense of corporate responsibility around this sort of stewardship of what happens within the time and place for our children's children, and how do we bring a sense of that into these large organisations? Because clearly, if they're only driven by a dollars and cents value, and that's how they identify wealth, then they're not going to be able to step across into the health arena or the ecological arena. So we do have this food security that's built in for us down the track.
Yeah, and look, absolutely, and look, when we are in a capitalist society. Coles and Woolworths, what is their objective? It's shareholder return. Now, most of you here will probably be within your super funds, indirectly or directly, you will be shareholders in Coles and Woolworths. You are actually personally invested in seeing those businesses do well. But in terms of, so it's not a question of what, it's more about how do we get that profitability. And there are models out there. So, shared value is a concept that's been talked about quite widely over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, whereby business can say, well, yes, we've got an economic responsibility for shareholder return, but ultimately we have a societal responsibility to do it in the right way. Nestle did a great program in their coffee plantations through South America, where they basically said, all right, we're going to put agronomists in, we'll fund agronomists to go in and help improve the quality of cocoa, increase yields, which will actually give us a better raw material, so we'll be more efficient, so we'll make more money as well. Now, the grower, that sort of subsistence farmer, that grower will get a better return. Nestle gets a better product. Consumer gets a better product, perhaps at a better price even. So it is possible. It's just putting the thoughts into it. And as always, it's about the whole supply chain working together on a common cause, as opposed to that. It's the overall pie as opposed to my individual, slice within the pie. But yeah, totally agree with you.